Hello again, everybody, and welcome to the LSU Sports Insider. Today is Tuesday, July the 30th. I'm Zach Ewing, joined by LSU beat writers for The Advocate, Wilson Alexander and Reed Darcey. And it is almost that time again. We're 2 days away from LSU's preseason camp opening. That happens on Thursday on campus. And boys, that means that the countdown is on.
I know it feels good. It's the off season. I feel like it sort of zoomed by this year a little bit more. Maybe it's just because of like stuff that we've got going on, like in our personal lives and stuff. Maybe it makes it feel faster, but I don't know. It sort of snuck up on me that, oh yeah, all of a sudden it's football season, which is a great feeling. I can't wait for this to all get underway in the fall. It particularly helps that we've been able to play the EA Sports college football game again. That's gotten me really excited for football season, gotta say.
How many seasons have you gotten through? I got to know.
2 at this point. I played my friends a lot in like an online sort of like one-off games. I've done a lot of that recently.
I have not been able to play yet, but I'm trying to find a way to get my hands on it some kind of way. Like asking friends, like, "Hey, you got it? Can I come over and play?" Like it's been crazy. But yeah, it's football season. It's back. It's getting ready. I got to get some sunscreen. I can't forget to get some before we head out to the first practice on Thursday. So yeah, it's real. It's coming and it's here. So it's exciting times.
Yeah, LSU starts on Thursday, and just so everybody knows, Wilson, you're joining us from Houston, where your wife Elise is going through cancer treatments. So we wish the best to her and to you all, as that continues, of course. And that's the background. I mean, it's football is important around these parts. We know that, but it's not that important. But we will soldier on. LSU Sports Insider, as you see on the screen there, is going to come to you every Thursday during the season. At least that's our plan for now, and we'll probably try to get some Monday episodes in there as well. The off season kind of officially comes to an end, and the two of you will have a post-practice podcast on Thursday to kind of recap the first day. You get to see a full practice on Thursday, so that'll be good. Also like to remind you that you can subscribe to The Advocate at theadvocate.com/subscribe, and you can also find this show on any podcast platform, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. I don't even know all of them, but pretty much anywhere you can find podcasts, we are there. So let's talk quickly, guys, about camp and just what you expect going in. Wilson had a great breakdown. You can check that out at theadvocate.com/LSU. And Wilson, it's a weird season, I feel like, for LSU, because you had a Heisman winner last year, a very good season, not a great season. And when you lose a guy like that, as well as a couple of first-round wide receiver talents, you feel like there should be a drop-off, but it doesn't feel like expectations have dropped off at all.
No, they haven't. Obviously, I think it's completely natural for there to be some offensive regression because of all the things that they lost, like you said, and first-time play caller here, at least at LSU, and Joe Sloan. And now, I don't know, it feels like things on the offensive side are still kind of like comfortable. You got Garrett Nussmeier, who's a sort of a known player at quarterback in some ways, at least known around this team because he's been there for the past 3 years. And he's shown some good things when he's gotten on the field, particularly the last 2 postseasons. You've got a really good offensive line, maybe one of the best in LSU history. You've got, talent at the skill positions, even though it's unproven. And you've even got like a really solid tight end in Mason Taylor. And so it feels like offensively, even though they might take a little bit of a step back, they should still be good on that side of the ball. It all just comes down to what they're able to do defensively with this new staff. And if they can really become, at least at this point, a mediocre defense, would be an improvement from last year.
Reed, do you think the expectations are fair to say, hey, let's go win 9-10 games again and be a college football playoff contender?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you're LSU, and you have Brian Kelly, I think the baseline should be 9-10 wins every year. LSU last 2 seasons they won 10 games, and it sort of felt like they kind of cobbled that together based on all the the recruiting losses they had, what they had to do in the transfer portal. It's some people forget, when Brian Kelly took over, he had 39 scholarship players, so he really had to remake the roster on the fly, and to do that, to win 10 games first 2 seasons. That should be the standard, and he's always going to say that LSU is competing for championships. You can't do that unless you win, at least 10 games. So I think, it'll be interesting to see, how the offense looks. I think it's a little unfair to expect them to be number one in the country, to be the record-setting kind of offense that they were last year. But you still have to hold them to that high standard to sort of maintain that sort of level of offense that they hit last year. And when camp opens, we'll be looking at what exactly is different about the offense. How exactly how are they trying to tweak things to sort of reincorporate a different kind of quarterback with a different kind of set of skill players, and just see like what's different about the offense and how is it going to be how are things going to change, and how are they trying to reincorporate some new talent. So that'll be interesting to watch when camp opens.
One thing that Reed said that it was interesting was like how LSU won 10 games the past 2 seasons, and like the expectations should be to always be that. I feels like this year the expectations are now a little bit different in terms of like what the fan base wants. Like 10 games, if they go 10-3 again, basically like they have, I guess, first season they went 10-4 and then 10-3 this past 2 years. But those 10th wins, came in sort of, in the bowl games, and sort of inconsequential bowl games. They've got to get to 10 wins in a regular season, because if they only go 9-3 in the regular season again, they're not going to make they could make the playoff. It depends on how things shake out, but you're more likely to make it in if you're 10-2. And that's really where LSU needs to get to, is being a 10-2 team in the regular season instead of a 9-3. And now that you're going into year 3 of the Brian Kelly era, I feel like that's the expectation, is to be in that sort of echelon of team instead of just below that.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, I think for one, you don't want to feel like you're spinning your tires and not progressing. But for another, the college football playoff expanding to 12 teams really changes the game, not just for LSU, but I think for a lot of teams. And we talked about this a little bit around media days, but now winning 10 games is not just, okay, that was a good season, but fan bases understand only 4 teams can get in. And it's you almost have to have some breaks fall your way unless you're truly one of the top 2 or 3 teams in the country and you're that elite in that particular year. But now being top 12 or really, let's say top 11, because the group of 5 does get one of those 12 spots. But to be top 11 seems like it's a lot more realistic every year for a team like LSU, or almost every year, to where the fan base can say, why can't we be number 9 or 11, even in a down year, and slip into the playoff and give ourselves a chance? So it sort of changes the game as far as 9-3, as you said, Wilson. Even in the SEC, I don't think 9-3 will get in. I think there'll be, a handful of 10-2 teams from the SEC and Big Ten. You'll have a team obviously from the ACC and in the Big 12, at least one team from those conferences get in. And so the spots are going to fill up. And if you're 9-3, I don't think you're getting one. And 9-3 is going to start to leave a sour taste in some mouths.
It absolutely will. I mean, 2 seasons of that after what Brian Kelly inherited, like Reed mentioned, it was good. It was a nice uptick. They went 11-12 the 2 seasons before he was hired. Don't forget that. But now it's time to start turning the corner and getting better. And a lot of that's going to start with some of the things they got to figure out here in camp.
So that's a good segue into camp. The way the calendar works out, camp starts August 1st. The season starts September 1st. So you get exactly 1 month between the first practice and the first game out there in Las Vegas against USC. So big storyline, guys. Obviously Garrett Nussmeier replacing Jaden Daniels, and how does he do? We've seen flashes in the few games that he's played that he can be a big time quarterback in the SEC. Can he do it consistently? Can he do it when defenses are game planning specifically for him? So that's one thing we'll be watching out for. And then, of course, the other one, as you guys mentioned, is Blake Baker's defense and how that looks different, how they use some of their star players, and then how they fill out some of the spots that were big-time problem areas last year, Reed.
Yeah, the defense is going to be the first thing we'll probably watch. There are some, a lot of questions still with the defense. We don't really know who's going to be starting at defensive tackle alongside Jacoby and Guillory. We really don't really know who's going to be starting at the outside corner spots. We sort of have a feel for how the rest of the defense could shake out. But again, we still have to see how LSU sort of configures the rest of the personnel. We still got to see how exactly they're trying to use Harold Perkins. Are snaps going to be most of them inside at middle linebacker, or how often are they going to move around? We still got to see that. We still got to see how the safeties shake out. We still got to see how Major Burns sort of integrates into the new role, where he's sort of like a hybrid nickel kind of linebacker type of role in Blake Baker's defense. And we've got to see exactly how Blake Baker wants to mix up some of the personnel groupings, particularly on the defensive line, to sort of maximize the pressure that they can get. Last year, they didn't create enough pressure from the line of scrimmage. They really struggled to collapse the pocket, get pressure on the quarterback, stop the run. So it'll start with that unit, and it'll start with how they can improve generating pressure and collapsing the pocket and putting offenses on their heels. So that'll be the first thing I'm looking for, and we'll just see how the position battles shake out after that.
So you're saying that if your defensive line doesn't get a pass rush and doesn't stop the run, that makes it hard to play defense.
It's not a good combination. not a good combination. Last year they didn't do either of those things very well.
Yeah. Well, we're going to dig into some of those position battles, and we'll get to the D tackles in a minute. Wanted to start with cornerbacks, Wilson, because that's another spot where, quite frankly, they got strafed at times last year. And part of that is the pass rush. Yeah, if the quarterback's sitting back there with all day to throw the ball, no cornerback can cover a receiver forever. It just can't happen. So part of it is the defensive line, but they also need better play in the secondary.
They absolutely do. I mean, even if the defensive backs were still a weakness, even if LSU had gotten more from its front seven, which it was really hoping for, was a strong front seven to kind of support what it already knew kind of in camp was going to be a weaker defensive secondary, and that he didn't get either of them, as we said. Not great, Bob. And those cornerbacks are going to certainly have to play a lot better. One thing that's going to be a little bit different here is also last year, LSU just kept playing this soft zone coverage, try to keep everything kind of in front of them, avoid, giving up the big play downfield. And as Brian Kelly sort of, admitted to this spring, just bend but don't break, because they had such a good offense, and that worked at times and then didn't work at other times. This year, they're going to be playing a little bit more of man coverage, or at least they would want to. Blake Baker said back in the spring that if you were to cut him open, he'd be a press man kind of guy. But he knows that these cornerbacks may not be quite ready for that yet. And that's going to be kind of a big thing to watch here in camp. Not only who wins the battle, but who, and this might dictate who wins the battle, who can play man coverage. I think that's one of the reasons P.J. Woodland was a riser here in the spring, is he was competitive in man coverage and right there trying to make a lot of plays. Didn't always make them here as a true freshman, but was there at least in position to be close to it. And that's something you can kind of build on with a player who's as young as he is. So that's going to be kind of the big thing. We saw it right out of the gate in spring practices. Corey Raymond back as the cornerbacks coach, teaching these guys how to play press man. That's something else he wants to get back to over time. And a big sort of storyline throughout the season is how much are they really able to do that? Because there's so many question marks on this defense and sort of unknowns, and things where last year there was clearly a deficiency. Are they going to be able to sort of turn that around in a year, or is it going to take multiple recruiting cycles, getting guys in like they've already recruited, with DJ Pickett, like a commitment at cornerback, 5 stars? They're going to take like getting folks like him back in, or they can improve the folks who are already on the roster. I think when you kind of go into camp here, you're looking at P.J. Woodland and Ashton Stamps as your first team cornerbacks. A lot hinges, though, on Zy Alexander's availability, how much he can do now as he's continuing to recover from a torn ACL. Expected to practice, but at what point, and how much will he be able to do? Now, there's no certainties when it comes to recovering from an ACL, even though the recovery has gotten so much better over the years. Those are probably kind of your top 3. J.K. Johnson and Jair Brown, 2 former Ohio State transfers, are also going to be in the mix, and it'll be interesting to see kind of what they can do and how they contribute here in the fall as well. It's really still wide open. Those spots are, and it's going to probably take a couple of weeks to really solidify who's playing out there.
Yeah, Wilson, I think I said this last week on the podcast. I said, there could be we could show up to practice on Thursday, and there could be 3 or 4 different guys starting at those 2 spots. I wouldn't be totally shocked. It really could be any of them. And that just sort of underscores the uncertainty that they have right now. We're working on a story, part of our preview coverage of just, looking at the defensive backs. We're looking at each position. Tomorrow we're going to have a story on the defensive backs. And I was looking at some of the last recruiting cycles just to see, how LSU fared, recruiting the secondary in recent years. I found that from 2020 to 2021, 2022, 2023, so that's 4 cycles, LSU signed 8 corners, 8 true cornerbacks. And of those 8, only 2 are currently on the roster. And of those 2, only 1 is going to be practicing at least at the start of fall camp. That's at Ashton Stamps. The other one is Javian Toviano, who has a legal situation that's ongoing. He's indefinitely suspended. So, the main thing take away from that is that LSU has gone through the last 4 recruiting cycles, and really all they have to show for it is Ashton Stamps at cornerback, who's a real solid player. He showed some flashes last year. He rose up through the ranks in fall camp, made a big jump up the depth chart. But that really just, goes to show, LSU, a school that calls itself DBU, hasn't really recruited well and retained talent well at the cornerback position in the recent years. And it's partly why they've had to rely so heavily on transfers. In 2022, Brian Kelly's first year, that worked out pretty well. You got a couple starters that gave you real solid production, guys you could lean on. But last year we saw how, the transfers that LSU brought in didn't work out. So transfer portal, it's a fickle beast. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. And LSU I think Brian Kelly is really trying to wean the program off the transfer portal, particularly at those two spots, and really restock their recruiting ranks.
Yeah, I think
this is really the first year where they've weaned themselves off, particularly at cornerback, and so it's going to be fascinating to see how that plays out now that the strategy has fully changed. Is that still the way to go moving forward? This year is going to kind of show us that in some ways.
I think people may not realize Blake Baker's defense at Missouri last year that kind of led him to LSU being interested in him was very good. He had two starting corners who played the majority of the snaps who were drafted last year. I think one in the second round, one in the fifth round. And so you had NFL talent at that position, and he leans on that to get a lot of production and be able to use the interior of his defense in other ways. And so LSU needs somebody to step up. And I think they've got talented guys. I mean, look, some of these, you mentioned J.K. Johnson, Jair Brown obviously were Ohio State recruits and transferred. I mean, there's got to be talent there. The question is, can they find the right guys in the right places? So that's at cornerback. Another one of the big position battles, guys, is going to be at defensive tackle. Again, got some newcomers there. You do have one returner in Jacobian Guillory who played quite a bit last year. Wilson, this is, again, that, as Reed said, it was a problem area, and they really need to step up.
They do. And, Guillory is going to be in the mix here. He's going to play, especially as a run defender when on first and second down. The key is going to be sort of, okay, does he secure a starting spot on those early downs here in camp? He's certainly a leader in the clubhouse at the moment. And then who's going to be next to him? Is it Gio Paez, the Wisconsin transfer? Is JVR Suggs, the guy who LSU ended up with here in the spring portal window after missing on some of those top defensive tackles? Is he capable of coming in from Grand Valley State and playing in the SEC right away? Same thing with Dominic McKinley, 5-star freshman, highly recruited, up to 316 pounds, but he's got to be able to play in the SEC as a freshman if he's going to get on the field. And otherwise, you're looking at a lot of the folks who they had. I keep saying folks for some reason today. A lot of players who they had back in the spring who were already on the roster, like Jalen Lee, Sean Washington, someone who they thought really highly of when they got him as a junior college transfer, former Georgia player out of high school, but didn't really make any waves in the spring. Is he going to be able to sort of make a move up the depth chart in the fall? There's all those sorts of, questions going on here going into the season. But as Reed alluded to earlier, another thing with the defensive tackles is who's on the field on third down. Because like you said, Blake he wants to be, in his words, a vertical one gap defense. And really what that means is create pressure and havoc in the backfield. And so they got to find some guys who can rush the passer on third down. If LSU is able to get to those points, being able to stop the run well enough on first and second down to set up a pass rush, you'll probably see more of a combo of guys like your edge rushers playing in some different spots like Savion Jones, Paris Shan, Braden Swinson, Harold Perkins, Deshaun Womack. They'll probably sort of like come up with some sort of personnel package for third downs that's a little bit more of like an athletic, fast pass rush. But those defensive tackles are going to be vital to getting you there, and that's what LSU's got to see is who's going to end up being there, and whoever is there, can they stop the run? It was tough at times watching LSU's defense try to stop the run in spring practice. LSU's got a really good offensive line, so you got to kind of like weigh that into your consideration. But it was still getting blown off the ball. There were some moments there in the spring when they were, and they can't continue to do that in the SEC. So that's kind of the biggest thing for me to watch here in the fall is can they stop the run on the defensive interior?
And just to be clear, like in these training camp practices, it can be difficult to tell. You guys aren't seeing the full 11
Absolutely.
sessions. And line play is difficult to judge anyway, to be honest, because you're watching it. Is that good defensive line play or bad offensive line play? We know LSU's offensive line is good. And so we would think if they could succeed against LSU that they would probably succeed against anybody. But the real answer is we're not going to know fully the answer to these questions until September begins and they start to play under the lights.
And Wilson mentioned the importance of stopping the run, something they really struggled to do last year. At SEC Media Days, Brian Kelly highlighted Gio Paez and JVR Suggs, the two transfers, and he said those are two guys who can, quote, eat up plays for us. So that indicated to me that he views them as run stoppers, guys who can be in on first and second. Try to mix it up in the middle and try to close those gaps on the inside and really help LSU's run defense. So expect, I would expect to see either one of them starting alongside, Jacoby and Guillory on first and second downs. And then when LSU gets in third downs, particularly third and longs, maybe you might see more of, the pass rushers in. So, and then mix it up along the defensive line. So try to get more of a pass rush and try to get more penetration from that spot of the defensive line, the interior. So that's one thing we'll be looking at for in preseason camp, just how Blake Baker and Brian Kelly sort of configures that unit.
Any other position battles you guys have your eyes on before we move on? I know wide receivers one, running back may not be a battle, but they clearly need somebody to step up there. Where else will you be kind of watching the depth chart and the stretch lines, Wilson?
Yeah, I mean, this is underrated, but punter. I mean, you got to be able to flip the field. You got to be able to pin teams deep and not let that, special teams has been, it wasn't an efficiency last year, but it wasn't like a real strength either. It just sort of, LSU just kind of got by on special teams, it felt like. And, Jay Bramblett was just a solid punter who you never had to worry about too much. And now they really, it's Blake Oschendorf, coming over from Louisiana Tech, going to be able to just slide right in and continue to provide that kind of peace of mind. Is going to be something to watch for. I know it's not like the top of mind, like quarterback or receiver, sort of those, flashy positions, but LSU does, you don't want to suddenly look up in September and everybody talking about why is LSU not punting well. So is it going to be him or is Peyton Todd going to be able to play better than he did in the spring? That's one. Like you said, all the receivers. I think there's not really a whole lot else. I guess the one position that we maybe haven't mentioned yet that comes to mind is safety. It's not really like a position battle. I think Jordan Gilbert is a starter, but is Sage Ryan going to be the other starter? Major Burns, like Reed mentioned earlier, moved down to the star position. There might be packages where he moves back at safety. Just kind of what is LSU's plan there? It's not really a position battle per se, but I think that we need to get a better idea of what the plan is going to be at that spot.
Yeah, absolutely. It's college football, right? And if you play NCAA 25, you got to fill up the depth chart every year at certain spots. So LSU's not alone in that, and that will certainly be something we watch as we go to camp. And then kind of a related note, guys, we talked about some of them, but transfers, freshmen coming in, who sees the field? Another thing that you can start to tell in camp just based on where they're lining up, which team they're with. Reed, who have you got your eye on as far as newcomers?
Yeah, this is a good transition because I thought about bringing them up when we were talking about position battles, but I want to talk about the receivers a little bit. CJ Daniels, the Liberty transfer, I think he's got a chance to really start right away and be on the field for pretty much every snap. He's sort of that vertical stretch kind of field, that stretch guy, that sort of deep threat. And Kyron Lacey, who we all expect to be on the field for every snap, really. He's more of like an intermediate kind of guy, the short to intermediate kind of routes he runs. And so does LSU use Lacey and CJ Daniels to sort of complement each other in a similar way that Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas complement each other with their routes last year? One sort of taking the shallow routes and one stretching the field, going deep. So I'll be interested to see how exactly LSU rotates the receivers early on. It might be the deepest position group that LSU has, considering all the options that they have in that room. Wilson, you can correct me on that. So it's just sort of, going to be interesting to see how the rotation kind of shakes out, particularly if we see LSU play more 12 personnel this year. 2 tight ends, 1 back. That takes a receiver off the field. Last year they were in 11 personnel the majority of the time, and that calls for 3 wide receivers. So do you have another tight end, and do you take a receiver off the field to have that tight end on the field? It's going to be interesting to see. I think either way it'll look different, and either way LSU has the talent to sort of be one of those top units in the SEC again.
Yeah, Wilson, your thoughts on that, and then also, I guess, a related question. In your opinion, is it good news if LSU is playing a bunch of newcomers, especially on defense? I mean, they needed to get some new bodies in.
Yeah, I guess let's see. I'll start my thoughts on what Reed said would be, obviously those newcomers are receivers, Xavier Thomas and CJ Daniels. Like LSU brought them in for a reason. They're gonna play. CJ Daniels in particular, out of those two, didn't really end up like cracking into the first team offense in the spring, but I think it was more of a matter of just like you need to learn the scheme to get up to speed. He's got so much experience. He was an 1,000-yard receiver last year at Liberty. Like I would fully expect him to be a big piece of this rotation. Their name we haven't mentioned there is Chris Hilton. You talk about like having a threat to stretch the field. That really should be Chris Hilton's role because of his speed. Jelani Watkins, a freshman, speaking of newcomers, is someone who Brian Kelly mentioned at media days as being a freshman who could play pretty early because of his speed. He's probably right away the fastest guy on the team based on his track numbers in high school. And so the other thing is, let's see, newcomers on defense. Is that a good or a bad thing? I think it's I guess it's a good thing if LSU is playing a lot of its newcomers on defense because last year the defense wasn't very good. A lot of that personnel is back. And especially because you would then see like, okay, you brought in a guy like Gio Pai as a sixth-year senior to be a player on this team, like to be a key player on this team. If he's not on the field, then that didn't pan out. Same thing with Jordan Gilbert at safety. If he's not on the field, then something went wrong because he was brought over here from Texas A&M after starting 12 of his last 13 games there to start again. He's got a guy with SEC starting experience. If he's not on the field and playing well, then again, something went wrong in the evaluation process or there was an injury involved, in which LSU really does not need at really any position to its top line guys in the defense. And, the other, I guess, same thing with Suggs. Like, I think there's a little bit more uncertainty with him coming from Grand Valley State. But if he's on the field, then that means you hit on maybe a little bit of a diamond in the rough. Even though he was pretty highly recruited coming out of the portal by a lot of top teams. And they're, then you hit on somebody who could really maybe pan out. So I think it would be, they didn't bring in tons and tons of newcomers on this defense, but they brought them in at specific spots to make a difference, especially with the time of the top guys. And if those three in particular end up playing a lot, then I think something has probably worked out pretty well in their evaluations in the portal. And it was maybe a little bit more successful than they were at times last year. The other newcomers, you can include freshmen in that. And I think, if Deshaun Spears is on the field as a freshman, that's probably a good thing in terms of like a sign that he's going to be a really good player for LSU over the next few years. He showed some flashes. So I think if those kinds of guys are on the field early, it's not a bad thing.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the old cliche is if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But LSU's defense was broken, so you got to fix it in some way. Coaching staff, players, whatever you can change. Obviously, you have some guys, Harold Perkins in particular, that you want to utilize more. But those newcomers are going to be key. Hey, we're going to wrap up with sort of our burning question about training camp and what these two guys are really looking forward to and having answered as they start to watch practices on Thursday. First, I want to take a quick break and word from our sponsor here on the LSU Sports Insider.
Football fans, with the Caesars Sportsbook app, you can be in the game all the time. Seeking instant action? Quick Picks offers you the most popular games and markets already built for you and ready to bet. Experience the thrill when you stack your bets to create a super parlay. Build bets for your favorite teams and players across multiple games. This season, don't just watch the game. Download Caesars Sportsbook and experience the game like never before.
All right, so you're watching the LSU Sports Insider podcast here. It is Tuesday, July the 30th, 2 days away from LSU's preseason camp starting in Baton Rouge. And Wilson Alexander, Reed Darcey, our beat writers, they will be there. They will be locked in and trying to figure out exactly what we've got from the Tigers in 2024. So I want to end here, guys, and I called it the burning question. It's Wilson, it's a question you kind of posed and said we should each have an answer to. What do you want to see in camp that would give you confidence that LSU can meet those expectations that we talked about at the beginning of the show?
Well, I already mentioned it earlier, but it's stopping the run. And like you said, we might not be able to really know coming out of preseason camp. Like last year when I thought back to what we thought we knew about this team coming out of the preseason, it was like, okay, they're going to be really good. on the offensive side, most likely. And Malik Neighbors is going to have an incredible season. And that panned out. The rest of it was kind of unclear and obviously went in the direction that it did. But I feel like if we can get any sense that LSU's defense is able to go toe-to-toe with the offensive line there and be winning reps at the line of scrimmage. They're not going to win all of them. They're going to get beat at times. But, like, be able to hold its own there, I think that would give me some confidence because that was probably the biggest concern I had about this defense coming out of spring practice. That thing, and also just sort of coming up to stop the run from the defensive, from the secondary, from the safety position. It wasn't a great showing, Jordan Gilbert and Sage Ryan, in terms of their run fits and angles to the ball and stuff in the spring game. And I think if they are a little bit better there and show some improvement in that regard, then I'll feel a lot better about this defense. Everybody's going to look at the pass defense with this team last year and how poor that was. But for me, if they can start by stopping the run and show some signs of that in the preseason, then my confidence meter will certainly be a little bit higher than it is at the moment.
Reed, how about you?
It would give me confidence, I think, if we show up to practice on Thursday. We see two corners starting in those two roles, and we kind of see them stick with those two guys. Maybe not for the entirety of camp, but maybe for the most of camp, because whoever those two guys would be, that would really show me that they have confidence in those two guys and that they trust those two guys, and that they're preparing them to really start for the season opener in Las Vegas against USC. I don't expect that to happen. I expect them to rotate a lot throughout camp and try to find the two guys that they want to start there. A lot of it depends, like Wilson said earlier, on the health of Zy Alexander. But again, I think if I saw some sort of stability there at those two spots, then I would feel a lot better about the defense, particularly going into that first game of the year.
I'll take
a quick point, real quick, Zach. A quick point just to back up what Reed said. If folks remember who were paying attention to camp last year, how they were cycling through cornerbacks, and all of a sudden, like a week and a half before the first game, Sage Ryan moved to corner. Like Ashton Stamps was rising up the depth chart, and you're like, all right, well, hey, there's a freshman rising up the depth chart, but it was also freshman's rising up the depth chart because the guys ahead of him aren't playing very well. Then all of a sudden, a week and a half before camp, they moved Sage Ryan. So it really would be a great change from last preseason if all of a sudden they have two guys who they like and they stick with it all the way through. Now let's hear let's hear yours, Zach.
Yeah, that was like a red flag in hindsight, wasn't it? That they were kind of there. I mean, look, I'll take the obvious one. I think y'all are right on the money with those, but I want to see Garrett Nussmeier showing confidence, showing he can lead this offense. I think we'll see that, but even more than that, I want to see him forming connections with receivers who we know will step up and take the place of Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas and kind of, because LSU's defense, look, it can't possibly be worse. Okay. It's going to regress in a positive direction. I just don't see how you could have the talent they have on the field, have a new voice in the coaching, new voices on the coaching staff, and not see some improvement. So if LSU can just keep the offense anywhere near where it was last year, I think they have a pretty good team. And I think the schedule sets up pretty well with a lot of the tough games at home. And I think expectations should rise a lot if we see that connection between Nussmeier and a couple of his new targets. Any final thoughts, guys, before we get out of here? As Wilson, you're heading east tomorrow, and football season's here, man.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Going to be driving back to Baton Rouge and be there. Practice is at 9:45 a.m. on Thursday. We'll actually get to see the entire thing. LSU has opened up a bunch of its practices to the media this preseason, where we get a lot of viewing. So we're looking forward to bringing all of our observations and takeaways from those to everybody over at the Advocate.
Reed, what you got?
Yeah, it's going to be fun. It's going to be exciting to see how things shake out. A month until Wilson makes the trip to Vegas. I'm kind of jealous of it for him and Scott Rabelais if you're going to go into Vegas. But that should be a fun trip, and that should be a really fun game. LSU, I just keep saying this, we had a month until the season. LSU hasn't won a season opener since 2019, since Joe Burrow was on the team. So it's like, I expect it to be a big discussion topic, this camp, what's it going to take to win that season opener, get over the hump? Because if they do win that game against USC, then that could be a big boost for them and their playoff hopes. But if they lose, then we're kind of in the same boat as we were last year, where we're sort of can envision like the season sliding away here, and the fans are frustrated and disappointed. So I think that first game is going to be really, really important.
Yeah, USC Lincoln Riley's offense will test this malign defense right away. So we'll find out pretty quick if they found any answers to those problems they had last year. As for us, you can find us every Thursday during the season on the LSU Sports Insider. It's the LSU at NOLA.com YouTube channel. Check us out there. Subscribe to the channel. If you like the content today, hit the like button for us. Share it with your friends, all that good stuff. And you can also find us audio only on all major podcast platforms, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify. You can also subscribe to The Advocate at theadvocate.com/subscribe and read all of these guys' work throughout the season. Football season is here. Congrats. We made it. Not just the EA Sports version, but the real world version. We got camp on Thursday. So for our beat writers, Wilson Alexander and Reed Darcey, I'm Zach Ewing, and we will see you next time on the LSU Sports Insider podcast.